Listen closely, child. Pull your chair near, and let me tell you something that happened in the little town of Maro, a place so small that everyone knew the name of everyone else's goat. In Maro, the old baobab tree at the center of town had heard more secrets than any priest. And the story I am about to tell you, that tree heard all. It began on a Tuesday morning in the dry season, when the air smelled of red dust and ripe mango. A man named Kofi stood in his front yard and pointed at his wife, Clara, the way you point at something you want to throw away. His voice was loud enough for the whole street to hear. "You are useless," he said. "You have given me nothing. You have built nothing. You sit in this house and breathe my air and eat my food. And what do I have to show for it?" Clara did not cry. She did not shout back. She stood very still, the way a tree stands still in a storm, bending a little but not breaking. Her eyes were dry. Her hands were folded at her waist. She simply looked at Kofi, and then she looked at the morning sky, and she said nothing at all. That silence, that terrible, quiet silence, is where this story truly begins. The neighbors heard everything. In Maro, walls were thin and fences were lower than people's pride. Mama Esi, who sold roasted corn at the end of the road, leaned forward on her stool and turned her ear toward Kofi's yard. Old Theo, the retired schoolteacher, paused his morning sweep and shook his head slowly. Even the children playing nearby went quiet, sensing the way children always sense when something grown and heavy is happening nearby. Kofi was not a cruel man by nature. People in Maro would tell you that. They would say he was proud. Yes, too proud for a man with only a small piece of land and a second-hand truck. They would say he'd been waiting for life to give him something grand, and the longer life made him wait, the more his frustration turned inward, then outward, and finally landed on Clara. Clara had married Kofi 12 years ago. She had come with a quiet smile, a strong back, and a dream she kept mostly to herself. Nobody in Maro knew much about that dream. Clara never talked loudly about herself. She simply worked, cooked, cleaned, tended the small vegetable patch behind the house, and sometimes late at night sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a pencil, writing things nobody ever asked about. "Pack what you can carry," Kofi told her that Tuesday morning. He said it like a man who had decided everything already and did not wish to discuss it further. "I am done. I want a different life." Clara looked at him one more time. Her eyes moved over his face the way you look at something you are memorizing, the way you look before you walk away from a place you know you will not return to. She went inside. She packed a single bag. It was not a big bag. It held one change of clothes, her notebook, a small photograph, and a leather coin purse her mother had given her on her wedding day. The coin purse had 12 coins in it, one for each year of marriage. She did not take the good pots. She did not take the radio. She did not take the extra sandals. She came back outside, picked up the bag, and walked down the road without looking back. Kofi watched her go. For one moment, just one small moment, something moved across his face. Not love, not exactly, but something close to it. Something that was not quite regret yet, but was walking in that direction. Then he shook it away. He went inside and made himself tea. And Maro kept breathing, unaware that everything was about to change. Nobody saw Clara for 3 days. Then 5 days. Then a full week passed, and people began to talk. Not the sharp, gossipy talk, but the soft, worried kind, the kind where voices drop low and eyes dart sideways. Where did she go? Mama Esi asked anyone who would listen. A woman doesn't just disappear. Old Theo said she probably went to her sister's house in the next region. Others said Clara had no sister worth speaking of. A few whispered that maybe she had gone somewhere very far. Kofi told the story differently to different people. To some, he said Clara had chosen to leave. To others, he said it was mutual, that they had both agreed the marriage was finished. But those who had heard him in the yard that Tuesday morning, those ones kept quiet and looked at the ground when Kofi spoke. Because they had heard the word he had used. Useless. It was an ugly word for a human being, the kind of word that leaves a mark. Kofi himself seemed fine at first. He ate. He drove his truck. He waved good morning to the neighbors. But Mama Esi noticed that his wave was a little too steady, the practiced wave of a man who is making sure he looks fine. And in Maro, People who tried too hard to look fine were usually anything but. 2 weeks after Clara walked down that road, a young man named Bright arrived in Maro. He drove a clean, dark car with papers on his lap, and he stopped at the edge of town to ask for directions. He was looking for a woman named Clara. Old Theo, who knew everything and forgot nothing, studied the young man carefully. "What do you want with Clara?" he asked. Bright smiled politely. He said he worked for a company, a publishing company, one of the largest in the country. He said they had been trying to reach Clara for 6 months and had only just tracked her to this town. Old Theo's eyebrows rose slowly, like bread baking. "Publishing," he said. "What kind of publishing?" Bright opened his folder and showed Old Theo a document. It had Clara's full name at the top. Below her name were the words, "Author, National Book Prize, First Place." Old Theo stared at that paper for a very long time. He said nothing. He simply pointed down the road. Then he turned around and walked straight to Mama ESI's corn stall, because when news this large arrives, it must be shared immediately. And Mama ESI, bless her soul, had a voice that carried all the way to the baobab tree and back. The news moved through Maro the way fire moves through dry grass, fast, low, and unstoppable. Clara had written a book, not just any book, a book that had entered a national competition and won the biggest prize in the country. The prize money was an amount that, when Mama ESI said it out loud, caused 3 people to sit down suddenly and 1 woman to knock over her bucket of washing water. No one in Maro had ever won anything like that. Nobody had even known that Clara was writing. But then again, had anyone ever truly asked? Had anyone sat across from Clara, looked her in the eyes, and said, "Tell me about yourself. Tell me what lives in that notebook of yours"? Kofi heard the news last. This is always how it works, have you noticed? The one who should know first always hears last. He was under his truck, tightening something, when his neighbor Kwame crouched down beside the wheel and said, very quietly, "Kofi, that woman you sent away, she won the National Book Prize." Kofi did not come out from under the truck for a long time. People passing by could see his boots sticking out from beneath the chassis, completely still, not moving, not even shifting, like a man who has been struck by something invisible and is waiting to find out if it has killed him. The young man named Bright did not find Clara in Maro, of course. She was no longer there, but he left a phone number with Old Theo and a letter, a thick letter with the publishing company's golden seal on the outside. Old Theo held the letter as carefully as a newborn and placed it on the highest shelf in his house, behind a glass where he kept his teaching certificates. He felt, somehow, that it deserved that kind of respect. The whole town felt that way. Something had shifted in Maro. It was hard to name, exactly. It was like when you have been looking at a painting on the wall all your life, and then one day someone tells you who painted it, and suddenly the painting looks completely different. Clara had been in their midst for 12 years. She had sold vegetables at the market. She had sewn torn clothes for neighbors at no charge. She had once stayed up all night with Mama ESI's sick daughter, pressing a cool cloth to the child's forehead. She had been kind and quiet and unassuming. And all that time, while she was doing all those ordinary things, she had also been building something extraordinary. In a notebook, at a kitchen table, late at night, when Kofi was asleep and the house was still, Clara had been writing a world. People began to remember things. Once you know a secret about someone, your memory sharpens and goes hunting for proof that the secret was always there, hiding in plain sight. Mama ESI remembered that Clara always knew the right word for things. She would describe the color of the evening sky. Mama ESI told anyone who would listen, and it would make your chest feel tight with beauty. Kwame's wife, Dora, remembered that she had once found Clara sitting on the back step, reading a thick book in French. Clara had smiled and said it was just something she found at the market. Dora had not thought much of it then. The school children remembered that whenever Clara substituted at the school, on the days when old Theo was unwell, the children did not want the lesson to end. She told them stories that came from somewhere inside her, clean and vivid, like water from a cold stream. Nobody had added these things together before. That is the thing about quiet people. They show you who they are one small piece at a time, and if you're not paying attention, you only see the pieces. You never see the whole person standing there, fully formed, waiting to be noticed. Maro had not been paying attention. And now, with Clara gone, the town was beginning to understand what it had not seen. Kofi started asking questions. Carefully at first, the way a man walks on ground he suspects might be soft. He asked Kwame if he had heard anything more. He asked Dora if she knew where Clara might have gone. He even, one evening, stopped outside old Theo's house and stood at the gate for a long moment before turning and walking away without knocking. Old Theo saw him from the window. He watched Kofi walk away and shook his head slowly. Pride, he thought. Pride is the heaviest thing a person can carry, and the most useless. Kofi lay awake that night. He thought about the word he had used. Useless. He turned it over in his mind, examining it. The way you examine a stone you have just realized is not a stone at all, but a piece of glass. And you see that you have been holding it by the wrong end all along. Clara, who had won the National Book Prize. Clara, who had written a world in a notebook at their kitchen table. Clara, who he had never once asked to tell him what was in that notebook. He thought about all the evenings he had come home, eaten her food, watched his television programs, and gone to sleep without asking his wife. Not even once. What are you writing? He had not even been curious. And now the whole country was curious. And Clara was gone. The letter on old Theo's shelf began to feel like a living thing. It was not just a letter anymore. It had become a symbol of something the whole town was grappling with. One night, a group of people gathered at Mama ESI's stall the way people gather when something needs to be felt together. The warmth of other bodies when a truth is too cold to sit with alone. Mama ESI made tea. Old Theo came with his walking stick. Kwame and Dora came. Even a few of the younger people came, sensing the gathering was about something important. Nobody talked about Clara directly at first. They talked about the weather, about the price of tomatoes, about the road that still hadn't been fixed after 2 rainy seasons. But eventually, the way it always eventually does in Maro, the real conversation floated to the surface. "We did not see her," Doris said quietly. "She was right here among us for 12 years, and we did not see her." There was a long silence. "We saw her," Mama ESI said. "We just did not look." No one argued with that, because there is a difference, a very important difference, between seeing a person and truly looking at them. Maro had been doing the first, but not the second. That night, under the baobab tree, the town sat with that knowledge and let it teach them something. 3 weeks after Clara left, something happened that nobody expected. A radio program began reading passages from Clara's book on the morning broadcast. The national station, the one everyone in Maro listened to over breakfast. The program host had a deep, warm voice that filled kitchens and living rooms, and that morning he said, "We are honoring the winner of this year's National Book Prize, a novel called The Quiet Road by Clara Mensah, originally from the town of Maro." In Maro, every hand that was holding a cup of tea or a slice of bread went completely still. The host began to read. The words were Clara's words, but hearing them spoken aloud by a stranger's deep voice over a radio that sat on ordinary kitchen shelves across the country, it was like hearing a familiar song played by an entire orchestra for the first time. The writing was beautiful. It was heartbreaking. It was about a woman in a small town who nobody saw. A woman who built a world in secret, not because she wanted to be secret, but because nobody had thought to ask her to share. People in Maro sat at their tables and did not speak. The only sound was the radio, reading Clara's words back to a town that had never once asked her to speak. Kofi heard the radio from his kitchen. He had been standing at the counter, staring at his tea. When the host said her name, Clara Mensah, originally from the town of Maro, something in his chest cracked open like dry wood under a heavy foot. He sat down. He listened. He did not move for the entire reading. The book was about a woman named Amara, but everyone who knew Clara, everyone who had lived beside her, recognized the small details immediately. The kitchen where Amara sat writing, the vegetable patch, the baobab tree. The husband in the book was not painted as a monster, and that is what undid Kofi most completely. The husband was simply absent, not cruel in great dramatic ways, but absent in the quiet, daily ways, never curious, never asking, never seeing. The husband in the book walked through his own house like a man walking through a train station, passing everyone without stopping. And Amara, Clara, had loved him. The book made that very clear. She had loved him and waited and written and hoped that one day he would stop and ask, "What are you making in that notebook?" He never did. By the time the radio reading ended, Kofi's tea had gone completely cold, and his face was wet in a way he was not ready to discuss with anyone. That morning became the morning Maro speaks of still, even now, many years later. Old Theo would later say it was the morning the town woke up, not from physical sleep, but from the slower, more dangerous kind of sleep, the sleep of assumption, the sleep of taking people for granted. Word spread quickly that the book was about Clara, that it was about Maro. People rushed to the bookshops in the regional capital and found the quiet road was already sold out. The bookshop owner said he had taken 40 orders in one morning. 40 orders from one small region alone. People wanted to hold the book that had come from among them, from their own roads, their own baobab tree, their own dust and mango and thin-walled houses. Back in Maro, there was a particular kind of embarrassment settling over the town. Not a shameful embarrassment, more like the feeling when you realize you have been sitting next to something priceless and mistaking it for ordinary. The questions people were asking themselves were uncomfortable ones. Had anyone encouraged Clara? Had anyone seen the notebook and asked about it? Had anyone told her she was talented, intelligent, extraordinary? The answer, as the day grew hotter and the questions grew louder, was becoming painfully clear. No, no one had. Kofi left Maro 4 days after the radio morning. He told no one where he was going. He simply loaded a few things into his truck and drove. Mama I watched him go. She crossed her arms and watched his truck grow smaller down the red dust road, and she said to Dora, who was standing beside her, "He is going to look for her." Dora was not sure. "Maybe he is just going," she said. "Men sometimes just go." "Not that way," Mama I replied. "That is the driving of a man trying to fix something." She was right, of course. Mama I was almost always right about these things. Kofi drove to the city first. He went to the publishing company's address, the one from a thick letter that old Theo had given him before he left, sliding it from behind the glass with the careful, knowing look of a man handing over something delicate. The publishing company's office was large and bright and full of books in glass cases. A young woman at the front desk told Kofi that Clara was in a different city for a reading event. She could not give him the address. She asked if he wanted to leave a message. Kofi sat in the chair across from her desk for a long moment. Then he said, "Tell her that Kofi came." "Tell her," he stopped. He tried again. "Tell her I read the book." Clara received the message 2 days later. She was sitting in a bright hotel room in a city that did not know her name 3 months ago, but now had her face on a poster in the bookshop window. She read the message on a small slip of paper that Bright, her editor, handed to her with a cautious look. She read it twice. Kofi came. Kofi read the book. She folded the paper carefully and put it in her coat pocket. Then she went to her window and looked out at the busy street below, at the yellow buses and the women with baskets on their heads and the children running between legs. And she stayed there for a long time. Bright knocked on the door gently and told her they needed to leave for the reading event in 20 minutes. She said she would be ready. She was ready. She went to the bookshop and read from her book to a room of 200 people, and her voice did not shake once. She read the passage where Amara sits at the kitchen table late at night, writing while her husband sleeps upstairs. The passage where Amara thinks, "I am not writing in secret. I'm writing out loud. I have always been writing out loud. I wonder when you will hear me." 200 people went quiet. 200 people felt something shift inside them. And in her coat pocket, the folded slip of paper with Kofi's message sat very still. Back in Maro, old Theo finally opened the copy of The Quiet Road that Bright had left behind. He read it in one sitting, from morning to the time the evening light turned the pages orange. When he finished, he sat for a long while in his reading chair, hands folded on top of the closed book. Then he took out a pen and a sheet of paper, and he wrote a letter to Clara. Not a short letter, a long one, several pages. He wrote about the year she had been in Maro. He wrote about the children who had loved her lessons. He wrote about the time she had carried Mama ESI's sick daughter on her back to the clinic when there was no vehicle available. He wrote about the way she described the color of the evening sky. He wrote, "We were blind in the way that people who have eyes often are. We looked without seeing. You were extraordinary in our midst, and we called it ordinary. That was our failure, not yours. Your book has given us a gift we did not deserve but badly needed, a mirror." He sent the letter to the publishing company. Whether it reached Clara, the town did not know for a while. But old Theo felt better for having written it. Sometimes the right thing to do is simply to say what is true, even if the saying comes late. Kofi did not go home after visiting the publishing company. He drove to the city where Clara's reading event had taken place. He was one day behind her. The bookshop owner remembered her clearly. "Lovely woman," the owner said, "very calm, very powerful when she speaks," and told Kofi she had already left for another event in the next city. Kofi drove there. He was sleeping in his truck at this point, washing his face at petrol stations and eating at small roadside stalls. He had never done anything like this in his life. He was a man who prided himself on never chasing after anything. And here he was chasing. The irony was not lost on him. He thought about that a lot as he drove, about how he had always waited for things to come to him. Success, recognition, the feeling of being important. And while he waited, pointing at life for not delivering what he felt owed, Clara had simply sat down every night and built something with her own two hands. Or rather, her own two words. One after another, night after night, year after year, in a notebook at a kitchen table in a house where her husband never once asked to see inside. The truck cab smelled of dust and old receipts. Kofi drove through the dark and thought about the man he had been, and the man he was not sure yet how to become. Clara heard he was following. Bright told her one afternoon, gently, the way you tell someone something that might be either welcome or dangerous, depending on the person. "The man from Maro," Bright said. "He has been asking after you at the events." Clara did not speak for a moment. Outside the window of the car they were traveling in, a long line of eucalyptus trees flashed past, pale and tall. "Is he still coming?" she asked. "It seems so," said Bright. Clara nodded. She looked back out at the eucalyptus trees. There are things in life that you carry that no one can see. Clara had carried her marriage for 12 years the way you carry a heavy thing for so long that you stop noticing the weight, until the day it is lifted and you feel the sudden lightness, and you also feel, strangely, the absence of something familiar. She did not know what she felt about Kofi following her. She did not try to decide. Some feelings deserve time. Some answers require patience. She had learned that, had written about it, even. Amara says it in chapter 9 of the book. "I do not need an answer yet. I need a little more time to remember who I am without the waiting." Clara looked at the eucalyptus trees until they were gone, and then she looked at the road ahead, long and pale and full of possibility. Kofi found her. It was at a small library in a town 3 hours from the city, on a rainy afternoon when the roof of the library made a soft drumming sound and the smell of old books mixed with petrichor, that particular sweetness of earth greeting rain, to create something that felt, to Kofi, like the inside of a prayer. Clara was speaking to a small group. He came in late and stood at the back, wet from the rain, his hat in his hands. She was reading from the last chapter of the book. He stood and listened. He was not the only one crying at the end. He was, however, the only one who had to keep turning away to compose himself. When the reading ended and the small crowd dispersed, Clara gathered her things slowly. She had seen him come in. She had seen him standing at the back. She had continued reading. When the room was almost empty, she walked toward him. They stood a few feet apart. The rain drummed on the roof. The librarian pretended to sort papers at the far end of the room. Kofi looked at Clara. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He tried again. What he eventually said was not a grand speech. It was not the kind of thing you could write on a poster or put on a radio. It was small and true, and it cost him more than anything he had ever paid for in his life. "I never asked," Kofi said. "I never asked what was in the notebook. I never asked who you were, Clara. I looked at you every day for 12 years, and I never once asked." He stopped. His voice was not steady. He pressed on anyway. I called you useless. I said that word out loud, to you, where other people could hear. And you were writing a book that the whole country is now reading. You were building something beautiful every single night in my house. And I was too. He stopped again. Searched for the word. Too closed, he said finally. Too closed to see it. Too full of my own disappointment with myself to see what I had. Clara listened to all of this without interrupting. She was very still, the way she had been still that Tuesday morning in the yard. But her eyes were different now. Not the eyes of a woman standing in a storm. These were the eyes of a woman who had been through the storm and come out the other side and knows, now, exactly where she stands. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I know, Kofi. Not I forgive you. Not come back. Just I know. And somehow, those two words were the most complicated thing in the room. They sat together in the library until it closed. The librarian, bless her soul, made them tea and left it on the table between them, and then went back to her sorting with great interest in the very distant shelf. They talked, not about coming back, not about what would happen next. They talked about what had been, about the 12 years. Clara told Kofi things she had never told him during those 12 years, about the book, about when she started writing it, about why she never showed him. I was afraid you would tell me to stop, she said, that it was not practical, that it was a waste of time. Kofi received that like a man receiving a stone in the chest, because he knew, they both knew, that this was likely exactly what he would have said. He was that kind of man, the kind who could not see value in something that did not yet have a price. He told her that, out loud. It seemed important to be honest about the exact shape of his failure. Clara listened. She wrapped her hands around the tea mug. I used to watch you sleep, she said quietly, and I would think, he has no idea who I am, not even a small idea, and I would wonder if it was my fault for not telling you, or yours for not asking. She looked at the rain-streaked window. I decided it was both, and I kept writing. The morning after the library, a new radio announcement went out across the country. This one was bigger than the first. Clara had been invited to appear on a national morning program, the most listened-to program in the country, the one that 20 million people woke up to every day. The host announced it the evening before. Tomorrow morning, we speak to Clara Mensa, the winner of the National Book Prize, author of The Quiet Road, and a woman whose story has become the story of every person who was ever told they were not enough. In Maro, old Theo heard the announcement and immediately walked to Mama ESI's stall. Mama ESI was already putting the radio in a more prominent position on her counter. All along the road, windows were opened wider. Doors were left ajar. People arranged their morning plans around the broadcast, starting breakfast earlier, sending children to school a little later. The baobab tree stood in the center of town, its roots deep and patient. The morning felt particular. It felt like the kind of morning that becomes a memory before it is even finished. In kitchens and on stoops and in small yards across the country, people turned their radios up and leaned forward just slightly because something real was about to be said, and they did not want to miss a single word. Clara's voice on the radio was calm and clear and warm. She spoke about the book. She spoke about writing in secret. Not because she was ashamed, she said, but because the world is very good at telling quiet people to stay quiet. And sometimes you protect your dream by keeping it close until it is strong enough to stand on its own. She spoke about being underestimated. It happens to many people, she said, women especially, but also men who are different, children who are strange, anyone who carries something inside them that the people around them cannot see. She was asked about Maro. She paused. Then she said, Maro taught me something I put in the book, that you cannot wait for the world to discover your value. You have to keep building it, whether anyone is watching or not, because the building is not for them. The building is for you. And then the host asked, gently, we have heard that the husband in the book is based on someone real. Do you want to speak about that? There was a pause that 20 million people leaned into. In Maro, even the goats seemed to be still. And then Clara said something that made Kofi, sitting in a small guest house 3 hours away, put his face in his hands. The man in the book, Clara said slowly, is not a villain. I want to be very clear about that. He is a man who is asleep, not in the cruel way. in a human way. The way all of us are asleep, sometimes, to the people standing right beside us. She paused. He is a man who did not ask. And I think if I'm being honest, I could have spoken more. I could have said, "Here is my notebook. Here is who I am. Here is my dream." I chose silence too, sometimes because silence felt safer. Another pause. I am not in the business of blame. The book is not revenge. The book is just truth, told in the most honest way I knew how. And if one person, just one person, reads it and decides to look more carefully at the quiet person sitting beside them, then it was worth every night I sat at that table and wrote. The host was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think there will be more than one person." Clara laughed, softly, briefly, the laugh of someone who is still learning to receive kindness without looking away. Back in Maro, Mama ESI was wiping her eyes. Old Theo was nodding steadily. The morning was warm and golden. And in that small town where everyone knew the name of everyone else's goat, something that had been broken was not yet fixed, but was, at last, being honestly examined. That is the story of Clara, child. Pull your chair a little closer and hear the end of it. Kofi went back to Maro. He did not go back to find Clara. He understood she needed time, maybe more time than he had right to ask for. He went back to live differently. He began to ask questions. Not grand questions, small ones. The kind that say, "I see you, I am curious about you, you matter." He asked Mama ESI about her childhood. He asked old Theo about the books he kept behind the glass. He stopped walking through the world like a man in a train station and started moving like a man who knew that every ordinary person beside him might be carrying something extraordinary. Clara kept writing. She visited Maro once, a year after the radio morning. She came quietly, without announcement, and walked to the baobab tree and sat under it for a long time. Mama ESI brought her roasted corn. Old Theo brought her tea. The children came and sat around her, close and attentive, because children always know who is worth listening to. She told them a story. She told them, "Every one of you is building something. Do not let anyone call it useless. Do not let anyone call you useless. Keep writing. Keep building. Even in the dark. Even in silence. Even when no one asks." The baobab tree stood over them all, its old roots holding the earth, its old branches holding the sky. And Maro, small, dusty, full of thin-walled houses and a very big heart, breathed in and breathed out, a little more awake than it had been before.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, comment and subscribe for more stories.